Hi everyone. So there it is, the Republic. This is a translation by Robin Waterfield. It's the one I'm reading at the moment, but there are many out there. So we could get into an argument about what's the right translation, but I'm not going to, because I think it's the philosophy that I'm interested in, not the language as such. Okay. So if you've read the Republic or know of it, there's a couple of things you might know about it that start us off, I suppose. So one is that the Republic is meant to be, in one sense, Plato's ideal of what a state should be. If you like, the most just state we could conceive of. And therefore, the immediate criticism is, well, I don't want to live in that republic, if you don't mind, because it sounds a bit crazy or authoritarian or whatever it is. So there's that kind of thing. So my first point is that if you think it's a blueprint for how we should design a state, I don't think you're going to get very far. I don't think it is. Plato himself, or Socrates speaking for Plato in the book, is saying it's so unlikely this will ever come about because I've designed something that's almost impossible to make happen. Right? So what is he doing? There's a big question. What is it for? Why invent a state, whatever we think about it, that's so difficult to put into practice? That what's the point of doing that? And that begins to get you to think that what he's really doing is not about, a political design for a future government. It's about how we think about the state that rules us, and more importantly, to some extent, how he thinks about ourselves. What governs us as individuals? Because what he's really doing is, as he says, is a search for morality. A search to understand morality that can guide us as individuals. And that's the starting point. But to do that, he has to say, well, it's so complicated, I'm going to have to come up with a perfect society as a model or as an allegory for that individual. And as soon as you start to do that, you realise, and as Justin said, it's 2,400 years ago, he invents psychology and almost Freud's sort of outline of psychology in this book, right? The tripartite view of the mind that he invents mirrors very closely Freud's view. I don't think there's any sort of hidden thing there. I think Freud read Plato, end of, right? Almost everybody reads Plato at some point if they're going to try and say something important. So it's as much about the individual, us, as it is about some nominal state. And as soon as you get there, you start to realise he's playing with us. He's telling us about ourselves. Who are we? What are the three parts of us that he starts to imagine? So I might try and pull that about a little bit. But the thing about morality, I think it goes even deeper. It's like so fundamental. It's like, how do we live a good life? I mean, that's the whole of Socratic dialogues. All of them are trying to look at this question. What is it to live a good life? And the great thing about Socrates, especially in the early dialogues, he says, I don't know, right? But I know it's not what you think it is, right? And that's the really powerful bit about Socratic dialogues, the inquiry into our ideas, is he tears apart those people who think they've got the answer to prove that they don't, have the answer. So in the early dialogues, you might look at something like piety. That's quite a difficult concept to get your head around today anyway, but what is it to be pious? And so he challenges a guy who's going to take his own father to jail to be accused of murder because he murdered a slave, as far as he was concerned, and say his father should be killed. And he's saying, well, how can you say that? How can you say that you are pious if you think that of your own family? And so he's constantly pulling apart our ideas about how we think we value things. And so the Republic starts with the question of what is it to be just? What is justice, which is an aspect of morality that is really, really important to us. It's funny, a friend of mine, you'll know him as well, is like a lawyer, been a lawyer for a long time. I said I was doing this book and he said, yeah, it's all about justice, isn't it? Yeah, whatever, because that's my job, I do that. But what it does is it says, how do you get at what justice is? Forces you to question every other thing you think you know about morality. And so in one sense, it's like, answer a simple question, right? So there's a very famous story in the beginning of this roughly called the Ring of Gyges, where one of Plato's or Socrates' sort of compatriots who's basically saying, look, I don't believe you, right? Because Socrates says, the only way to live a life is a moral life. That's a good life. And this guy, who happens to be Plato's brother, but Glaucon, basically says to him, well, I can't accept it because the immoral life is better, isn't it? Right? So, and if you had the chance, wouldn't you take it? So the Ring of Gyges is a story about a ring that was found on some dead, long-lost king who was pulled out by a farmer. You put it on, you vanish, you disappear. And therefore, you have a power that is not real, but it would allow you to do things and get away with them. So in the story, he kills the king, seduces the wife, steals all the goodies and what have you. And why wouldn't you if you had that ring and you can't be caught? So if you can't be held to account, is the immoral life wrong? Would you resist the temptation? And that's a heck of a challenge in the book, never mind, but to us. Are we really up to the moral scrutiny that Plato is setting us? And then you just look out the room at the world and the people who are supposedly in charge of us. I shouldn't name them, but there are a few who own houses they didn't ought to and don't pay taxes and all the rest of this stuff. They seem to want to just take it because they can, right? And so this idea that you could be moral and held to account is a really fundamental challenge to all of us, never mind our own leaders. All right? So I think that's just one thing. However, just to stretch it a bit, right? So if you know the book at all, you'll know that what Plato's answer is to the ideal society is you have to put guess who in charge? The philosophers. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Right? And so, and the moment he says that, and he creates the idea of philosopher kings as a way of ruling this just society, this perfect society, it's immediately put under scrutiny and basically said, well, it's impossible. Right? How are you going to do that? Never mind who are they, how they're going to be educated and all the rest of it. If you then get them to even become as good as they should be, a good philosopher, not a rubbish one, a good one, why the hell would they want to come back and try and get the rest of us to behave? And so he creates this idea which is extremely powerful. It's like the best rulers are the ones who don't want to rule. They don't want it. And they would have to be, in a sense, cajoled into doing this job for us. Because they're not, according to Plato, they wouldn't get any wealth from it, because we deny them that. They wouldn't get any benefits that are above and beyond the normal. They'd be doing it for the good of all of us, the good of the community. So a community run by people who've had a challenging education puts them in a place where they can see how things should be and then have to devote their lives to getting us to see how things should be and running that society. So it's no surprise that he himself says the chances of this happening are slim at best, right? The way he sort of portrays it is you'd have to have a king who's going to be a king anyway and suddenly became a philosopher and then became a really good philosopher and then decided to do good, you know, to make this society work. And to me, that's saying a lot. It's like saying this isn't the model of a normal society we're talking about. It's an ideal. It's an ideal he's put up, which you could say is impossible to achieve, but at least we can hold ourselves against it. We can hold ourselves in scrutiny. Are we anywhere close to managing to pull off what he said we should pull off? Now, you could then argue, well, it's the wrong thing to do. Right? Maybe come back to that a little bit. But there's something that sort of underlies the ability to create the philosopher king, which is, what do they have to know? And this, I think, is probably the most powerful bit of the book for me, is that what he's saying is that, how do you understand morality? Well, you can't understand morality unless you know what goodness is. Now, well, I remember when I first read this, it just swept past me. I didn't get any of it at all. It just, what are you talking about, right? But what he's saying is that there are ideas that are fundamental, that underlie all the other ideas we have that are derived from them. And you can't be just if you don't know what it is to be good. Because how would you know? You just make a mess of it. So you've got to know what goodness is. And that doesn't mean a good thing. It means the idea of good itself. And what this is sort of pointing to is his theory of knowledge, if you like, which is it's called the forms in the trade. So there are ideas which underlie our conceptions of everything else we think we know. Put it even more bluntly, so when you look at things like, I don't know, the table, books or whatever, they're objects that we understand through our senses and we think we know them. And what he's saying is, no, you don't know them. You know what your senses tell you. That's not what it really is. And if you know your philosophy, this might ring some bells, because this sounds very much like Kant, right? The thing in itself. And again, we're going back 2,500 years and finding within Plato the essence of some of the ideas that underlie the Enlightenment, right? So it's, and it's not it's sort of a hidden thing. It's not a kind of difficult thing to find. It's difficult to deal with. That's the problem. And so what he's saying is, what is really real are ideas. That is the bit that, if there's anything you can take from this and play around with, that's the bit. And so he's, in effect, creating a realm of ideas that is apart from a realm of reality as we normally describe it. How is that important? Well, it's huge. So just a couple of things. So a lot of people who I've met and we've discussed Plato have fallen back on saying, yeah, but science doesn't work that way. Science is the way that we understand the world, and it's built on senses and it's built on empirical data and all the rest of it. And what Plato's saying is completely against that in one respect, and saying that there's something else. So my challenge there is to say that, well, actually, I think we miss a huge amount by relying on data and thinking that science tells us everything and thinking there's nothing else to know. Because without ideas, how do you look at whatever it is you're looking at, the data, the objects, the reality we so-called see? And so Plato's challenge is it's never going to go away unless we resolve this, and I don't think it's very particularly easy to resolve. So, how we know what we know and what is it we know are fundamental to the Republic. And the Republic is like one of a few dialogues which has this idea at its core. But then, just very, very briefly, Plato criticised himself. So if you read his later dialogues, he actually attacked the idea of the forms himself. Now, whether that's, the end of the story or not, it's at least there. So, what am I getting to? If you read the Republic, great. But then you're going to read all the rest of Plato as well to try and make sense of it. And then you can't stop. You have to keep going. So if there's one thing that Plato, reading the Republic, should do to you, if you can engage with it, is to give you a sense that I don't know the answer. I've got to keep going myself. We've all got to keep going. So I was going to do a tiny bit on democracy, just a little bit, because there's one thing that is true, is that Plato is not a fan of democracy. It's not at all. Why? Put simply, democracy was responsible for the death of his mentor and friend Socrates. Right? He was killed after he stood trial by jury. If I'm right, it's 501 jurors in Athens who voted that he had led the youth astray and invented gods and all the rest of it. And so if you read most of Plato's dialogues, they're basically an argument which takes apart the case made against Socrates, and not least the fact that they didn't listen to him and they voted for his death. And even more challenging is that Socrates accepted it. He didn't fight it, he accepted it. He said, "You're my state, you're my laws, I must obey you because I am from you," and took it. So what Plato's saying is, how the hell could you do that to one of the greatest people that's ever walked the earth, as far as he was concerned? And so there's a sense that democracy can go wrong. We can make the wrong decision. I think it's a fair challenge. It's a fair challenge to us, right? Now, I'm not against democracy, but I do worry, right? Especially in the era of populism. What are we letting ourselves in for? And we could have a massive argument about that. But very briefly, what Plato warns us is democracy leads to tyranny, tyrants who we vote in, basically. I'll just let that lay there. Right. So I think he's got a real sense of the problems we face. Never mind him, because it was not an easy time in Athens when he was alive. Right? All sorts of things went haywire. Right, so there's an awful lot that he's doing that you can take from the Republic that echoes at least the questions we have of our own world or our own ideas. Okay, I don't really think I'll push it any further than that. I'll leave it there. There's loads more though, but
Maybe we should pull some of that out in the...
Whatever, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Pleasure.